Welcome to the Phoenix Effect podcast with Elle, Kristen, and Dennis. We are three narrative-trained therapists, and we will be interviewing storytellers from all walks of life. We will explore what people do to find belonging, purpose, and success. Listen in as we delve into the depths of the human experience. If you have a story you would like to tell, stay tuned to find out how to become a part of the show. Are you ready for a good story? Here we go. Welcome back, Nathan Key. Dennis, do you want to lead in with the questions? You were ready to bust out.
Yeah, we're all pivoting a little bit, and Nathan was just pivoting and joined us today, cleared some space, and now we're processing for the first time since about, 3 weeks ago? What was that experience like for you?
It was different than I expected. So I've listened to the podcast. I'm a big fan, the number one fan of the Phoenix Effect podcast. I don't know if the number one is right.
Also our only fan.
That's not true. There's a few others.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I think there's three things I took away, and maybe we can unpack more because you may have some things. Like the first was, Dennis, I felt so attended to by you during that. And it was almost a little dysregulating at the end when I realized just how much I needed to have another guy tell me that my experience was one of being bold and being a man and not necessarily one to be ashamed of. And so I think that was the first thing I was taking away. The second thing that I took away was you all picked up so quickly on the fact that I started talking really fast in the middle of my story. And I was oblivious to it. And it makes me wonder, how many other little social cues do I give away that people are able to, if they know me and they're really able to do this kind of work, would be able to pull down and say, okay, I see you doing this thing. What's behind that? And to use that to dig in further. And I guess the last thing was, and I'd been working hard not to defend my parents in the midst of it. And then I was like, oh, shoot, I didn't even attempt to defend them in this. Maybe I went a little too far the other way. Again, I think most people that listen to this podcast know that all of us are human beings that make good and bad choices, including our parents. And my parents aren't horrible, abusive people. I was like, oh man, I hope I didn't make them out to be the worst. But at the same time, in that moment, maybe it was the worst for me. So anyway, I think those are the three things that I was really taking away and thinking about.
And I'm wondering if we want to dig into any one of those three. And I guess I had one other question for you. And and it is part of, I think, the reason why we are doing this is that we are hoping that there is some healing coming into some of these areas that we just didn't really receive what we really had needed. And you seem like you were identifying in that first point, you know what, I actually was really cared for. And to have a guy be able to step into this space and say that you were really showing up as a man, even as a kid, that meant a lot to me. Do you feel like that's was a healing? Was that a healing experience for you? Do you feel like areas that you had maybe some longing in or some self-contempt in, or I don't know, I guess, can you use your words?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think in the weeks since, especially the few hours and days after that, but I don't think I had quite realized just how much of a void I had from four other male voices giving that sort of attunement and that sort of care to me personally.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect that story to go towards my father, and it did. And then I also, at the same time, had this other man who's now speaking affirmations and truths towards my story and towards that history. And it was, I don't think I noticed until that moment just how needed it was.
Let's go into Kristen. Kristen, I'm curious, what are you seeing and what questions might you have?
Yeah, I had to sit out the last one, unfortunately, because my Wi-Fi wasn't cooperating. So I was really in and out, but got to listen to it later. And really appreciated y'all's engagement. I guess I think what's so fun, what can be so fun or interesting about story work is there's so many different ways that you can take a story, and different eyes on the same story can bring out so many different things and draw on so many different things that are seen or that may be not named yet. And I love the direction that y'all went and that Dennis was able to provide that for you. And I guess I'm wondering how is it all sitting with you since? What do you do with what was spoken about?
That's the real work, right? I think it's made me ask some questions. I don't know that I've necessarily done anything super meaningful other than just ask some questions and notice, maybe, because life starts happening, right? And you just get back into the grind. But then there's also opportunities. Like I had a chance to go interact with my parents twice since then. And just in the midst of those, there's just a noticing of just how my parents show up with each other and show up with me and show up with guests that are around. And it's not the same as when we were kids anymore, but there's still some parts of that. And like the other day, my cousin was over and I actually asked my dad some questions just about his experience with his mom, who he doesn't ever talk about. And he did actually share a little bit. And it's something I don't think I've ever really heard before. And I think maybe that's just part of what I'm working through, is just realizing that as much as I don't know my dad, he also hasn't shared that stuff with me. And so is there a way for me to maybe step in and ask those questions so I can learn more about him?
Yeah, that noticing and that curiosity is maybe a lot more powerful than you give it credit for.
It
Yeah.
feels like a little bit of grief pops up with the longing when you realize, oh, I didn't get that. And the grief is moving you towards your dad.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a new thing, although it's just kind of part of a trajectory. I don't know. It's probably it was a number of years ago. My dad had a medical scare, and then he had another one that was different, but it was still like me left with this thinking that, like, how much longer do I have with my parents? And I know we're all in that space where it's like, if our parents haven't passed yet, it's like, when is that going to happen? And the days get shorter, and you just realize just how little there is left to have that relationship. And so I think for the past decade, especially, I have been trying to figure out ways to engage with my dad, especially because I feel like my relationship with my mom is quite verbal and we talk all the time. And there's, a lot of back and forth with my dad. So it's a little bit less. So I think this is just maybe part of that chain of trying to like re-engage with my dad in ways that he just either hasn't before, or we just haven't had the opportunity to do. So I think it was a good reminder that he may not make that move. And so if I want that relationship, I need to have it. And that kind of circumvented the question because you were talking about grief. And so I think the reason I went there is because it's partly, as I'm saying, I wish I'd had this for the past 40 years. But the other half of me is, I do have some time left. Can I get some of it? I don't know if I can or not, but can I? Is there a way for me to engage and figure out how to get some of that?
I think often the fear is if we speak these things out loud, then we can't have a relationship with our parents, or we'll need to cut them off or limit interactions. And so I just
Yeah.
wanted to highlight that didn't happen. It increased your
Yeah.
curiosity. It increased your desire.
They haven't listened to this yet. So there's always that possibility. But I hope, I don't think they're in a stage in life where they're unable to hear things. And I would hope that even if they listen to the podcast, they wouldn't feel like I was just painting them to be horrible people. It's just a moment in time that was causing harm to me. It doesn't necessarily mean that I've done the same thing to my kids too. So it's not like it's unrepairable. It's just exploring that is difficult. And I don't think people I don't like to show that with my parents, but I might be a little embarrassed if they saw it. But at the same time, like you said, like the only way to get past this is to actually name it.
What would be, like, if it were the best case scenario? What would the best case scenario outcome of, if your parents listen to this, what would you really hope would happen?
Maybe curiosity on their part as well, right? We can't go back and change the past. We can't undo it, but like curiosity to see how is that showing up for me now, and like what are other ways that maybe I was harmed, and not to make amends for it necessarily, but to still figure out like how that is presenting in my adult life and just maybe make sense of each other a little bit more. I think that would probably be the best case scenario. It's just a healthy curiosity about each other as opposed to shame. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be my hope.
Yeah. And ultimately, it sounds like you're sharing, like you're actually still working hard. So, like, we did this story, and now you're going and you're working hard with your dad. And you were excited that he actually opened up and he responded to your good hard work and provided you a little bit of his, shared a little bit of his life with you, right?
Yeah.
And is that what you're like desiring? You're desiring to get to really know who your father is. Like, what was his life experiences growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think everybody shares themselves the same way, but like for me, who's a sharer, it feels good when somebody else trusts me with their history and somebody
Yeah.
else trusts me with their life and enough to, talk to me about it. Yeah, I think so. And some, it's connection, right? That's what I'm looking for.
I love both of those words, like connection and trust.
Mm.
And it does. It takes some trust to open up and be vulnerable. And like, why shouldn't a father and a son have that?
Yeah.
They should have that, right? And like for me, I was thinking like maybe a best case scenario, like if I were to be looking at it, would be that your father might open up more
Yeah.
of his own choosing without like you even having to work hard for it. Like
Mm.
that he would call you, hey man, I was just thinking of this time when I was a kid. I want to share it with you. What do you got going on this weekend? You want to, that's what I would long for with my dad, that it wouldn't have to
Yeah.
be so much hard work from me.
What if he moved towards you? What if he
Yeah.
pursued you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny in the midst of all this. The question is so good and it's so exposing that I feel like I'm the one that has to do the work as opposed to saying that no, this should be something that's equal, that we both move towards each other, not that I'm moving towards somebody and they're finally relenting.
And gosh, I don't know if I want to exactly move away from this. Does anybody have any other questions? Because I did have another question then.
I'm thinking about this element of feeling shame for quote unquote exposing the family, exposing family secrets, exposing the shame, the potential shame of somebody, and that not wanting to be your intention. And
Yeah.
thinking about the role as a truth teller.
Mm.
And I see you as someone who's just really wanting to tell the truth
Mm.
as a way to find connection. And not everybody really likes that. It's really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. That is something that I've had to negotiate for my whole life because I really have a strong drive for approval and
Mhm.
for relationship and connection. And yet there's a risk. If you say the wrong thing, you alienate someone. If you make the wrong move, you might lose connection. You might not be the one that, ends up being able to participate in whatever the relationship is. And I don't know where I learned that, but I probably learned it in the story that I told the other day. But yeah, you're right. It is tough because I want that ability to be able to like just have like transparent, candid conversations and be a truth teller. But at the same time, there's that risk of you lose everything that's important, which is the connection with other people.
So I see you doing all these moves, going around and saying, can I get in this way? Oh, no, that's not okay. Okay, let me try getting in this way. And that's a lot of movement from you. And I'm not seeing a lot of movement from other folks to meet you in that. I'm just wondering why you have to do all the work.
Good question. Why am I doing all the work?
It sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're after a really valuable and valid thing and just saying, could we just speak honestly?
Yeah.
Can I know some of the basics, Dad?
Yeah.
What was your relationship like with your mom? Could I finally hear that story?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of dancing around. Again, I don't know that I've actually asked that question, maybe once or twice in my life, and this was maybe the third time total, because just it wasn't something that came up. It was shut down if it did. Yeah.
But I don't find you to be a non-curious human. Like I would,
Yeah.
I don't know you very well, but I would suspect that you're a person who is pretty curious about people and likes to get
Yeah.
to know them and ask questions. And
Yeah.
so if you're not asking someone questions, I would think that there's probably a really good reason why. And it's not because that's just who you are.
Yeah. You learn. I I imagine I don't have a memory to associate with this, but I just imagine that there are instances where there's some people you ask questions and they open up. Like my mom, if I ask her a question, we have a 10-hour dialogue about something. Whereas I didn't ask those kind of questions or didn't interact with my dad because if he doesn't want to go down that route, it very quickly just goes to a closed-ended answer that doesn't allow for additional exploration. And I'm sure we've all encountered people like that just know how to shut a conversation down and you don't even realize how they're doing it. They just shut it down and it's okay, we're not going there.
And as a kid going to a father, I'm assuming that this is something that happened not just as an adult, but a pattern that's been indicative of your relationship with your dad. But I can imagine that as a kid going to his father, having curiosity, wanting to explore, to speak truth, to share stories, to whatever that is, exchange information, and to be continually shut down in a way that you're not even quite sure how he did it. I
Yeah.
wonder where you go with that. Like, how does a kid hold that?
Yeah. I can tell you my experience, that you go to the parent that engages. So I gravitate towards my mother, who wants to talk about things all the time and will hold many discussions with me at length, even hold contentious ones for a long time, right? That's where I go with it. Whereas, and again, I don't have a specific memory attached to my dad of feeling like I was shut down or, ignored or displaced or unanswered. And yet the story goes that I don't engage with him. So it may be pre-memory. It may be that it's just something that I just will learn through observation. But again, it's something that he was the silent member, occasionally asking some questions, but really it was my mom was the focus of the conversation and the kids, and he was a fixture that was there and present. And when it came time to read the Bible or do some of the other things that were his role, quote unquote, he was definitely going to participate in those, but I wasn't always engaging with him the way I did with my mom.
Yeah, maybe you don't
Yeah.
remember because it happened so many times that there's no one particular incident that really stands out as significant.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels a lot like you're entering into spaces trying to figure out what's the exact right way to manage all the people so I don't lose connection. Does that feel true?
Yeah, I'd say that's true. And just to go with what you're saying there, I would say my dad did actually ask me to participate with him in activities, but they were always related to things that were like work, manual labor, like helping him build the deck in the back. Or again, I don't think as a as an elementary schooler or whatever, I really appreciated that was my dad's maybe bid to spend time with me because it seemed like chores. Okay, we're going to go hammer nails into the deck and work for a couple hours straight. This is hard manual labor, and we're not really engaging and talking with each other. We're just working side by side. I don't necessarily know that I interpreted that as relationship, but it may have been that was my dad's way of making that connection. And at the same time, so what you're saying is it's the reason it kind of came up, Elle, is because I'm thinking, yeah, if I gotta go work, I gotta do hard manual labor to go spend time with my dad. That's what you do is like you have to work hard. You have to sweat and you have to really be uncomfortable just to make these connections. And you probably don't even want to do the things.
Is that how you interact with your kids?
I don't I make them do chores, but I don't necessarily do
Right.
them with them.
Right. Yeah, they're like separate. There's some separation there, right?
Yeah. I'd like the kids to go mow the lawn, but I'm not going to go mow the lawn with them.
Right.
They're going to be out there by themselves. So I don't know that I necessarily do that. I think there's been occasions when I've had little projects that we've done, but I think I usually try to make them around their interests,
Yeah.
not
And
necessarily mine. I
sometimes,
like to play soccer with them. I think that they like it. The ones that don't, make it pretty clear that they're outgrowing it or whatever. And I try to let go of those things and try to find other ways to interact with them that is on their level.
This is where I
around their
have an
interests.
unfair advantage. I have an unfair advantage here.
You see me interact with our children.
Yeah. Tell me about, or tell everyone about what happened when I went to Washington, D.C. with one child, and then I came back and something had happened with you and the oldest. A little story time. What happened?
Oh, you talking about us watching a show together?
Go on.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was doing the right things. Our oldest has always wanted to watch some different television programs that are probably not quite age appropriate yet. And because Elle wasn't there, which meant that Noah wasn't there, who's right on the cusp of Ethan's age. He's a little bit younger, but not quite ready for some of the things that our oldest would be ready for. So I invited him to pick some shows that he thought he might want to watch that are just like horror movies or whatever. Like, I know you've had the itch to go do these things, so let's go look on the stuff. Let's find the things that are 16 plus that like your little brothers can't watch, and we'll sit down and watch them. And we ended up watching The Last of Us on HBO, which again, Common Sense Media said it was okay, and so we did, and it was a little more intense than I think he was expecting it to be. And we watched the entire season, and he came down every night. It wasn't just while Elle was in Washington DC. Every night at 9:30 he was downstairs, turned in his phone and his electronics, and sat down and said, "Hey, want to watch the next episode, right? We're gonna watch the next episode." And it was really good. It was,
And did you have
and
any
I think it was.
interest in zombie movies about video games?
Do I have any interest in zombie movies about video games?
Yeah,
I don't know that I would have watched it without him.
exactly. You were in the role of pursuer. You created and invited something very in touch with who he is and what he likes.
And it didn't have to be that. I gave him the option. I said, "Hey, let's look at other things too. You want to watch a Predator movie?" He watched some of the previews from Dennis. Probably watched those, right? You're like,
Oh yeah.
he watched some of the previews from like the 80s, and he's, "No, we're not watching this.
And
Looks too cheesy to me."
no, I've watched Predator with my boys, and I'm a big fan of going through Common Sense Media and trying to find things that like that are maybe outside of my wheelhouse, but that are in their interests. And what was your sense like that what is your sense when he looks back 10 years from now of that time? What do you think he's making of that?
I think the more obvious one is probably finally my dad let me watch something. But I think the other half of it was maybe he'll be like, "Hey, it was pretty cool. I got to watch that with my dad."
Yeah. I don't know.
Oh,
I think you're undervaluing the effect that in 10 years, when he looks back on this, what that is going to actually mean to him.
And it might be I don't remember a specific time that my dad really showed me that he cared, but I just know that he cared.
yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot different than, I don't know, Nathan. And I'm only saying this because I've done it. Like, I've done my share of post hole digging in my parents' yard. I've done my share of landscaping in my parents' yard. A lot of times it more involved my dad coming out to survey the quality of my work. But in times where it was beyond where I was at, he did it alongside me. But there's an element of having felt somewhat used.
Yeah.
Like, why couldn't we go do something that I would have really enjoyed?
Yeah.
Why is the connection time, the bonding time with me working my ass off and sweating? But I do appreciate like what I've learned from those times, but I also don't appreciate that I never fully developed the relationship. And in some ways, I feel actually somewhat having been used because I'm a good laborer, and my dad knows I'm going to do everything. Like, my goodness was Like I showed up hard, like in ways like I would do really impress him. I'm really digging post holes. Watch this, Dad. Like digging the hell out of the post holes. And I look back and now I've got a little bit of contempt for myself. I'm like, man, why did you feel like a little bit used? And because we didn't, I don't know. It's just, I'm noticing two different things. I'm like, how is it that you are able to cultivate that with your son when it wasn't cultivated for you?
I happen to be married to this excellent therapist, so I get like all these.
I feel like two times in a row, you really downplay what you do. And I'm
Yeah.
curious about that.
How is it that I'm able to develop a relationship with my kids where I wasn't having that with me? I don't know that I'm always able to do it really well, but I really want it. And I don't always feel like the relationship that I had with my oldest son has been the best. And so even to this day, like we go at each other sometimes. But I also know that some of that is just because of how he's wired up. And so that's about how I'm wired up. And so I look for opportunities to make sure that he knows that, like, however much we go at each other, I love him. I really care about him as a person. And I really do want him to be successful. And even the things that I probably get him riled up where he doesn't want it, like in the midst of it, I try to like explain that this is because I want you to be a healthy, successful adult, not because I don't want you to do certain things, because I really love you and I really want you to be the amazing person that I know you can be. This is my people, right? My wife and my kids are my people and I love them. And so I want a relationship with them and I want to have that. So I think that's why I'm doing that work and really trying to find those connection points.
You didn't really have a role model of a father who is looking for those connection points. And so this is not something that is second nature to you. And yet you're still noticing your relationship with your son and monitoring how healthy that is, or if it needs improvement for whatever reason, and intentionally making strides to make that type of connection, flawed as it may be. It sounds
Yeah.
like you're doing a hell of a job. And even seeing, as you're talking about him coming down at 9:30 every night, waiting for the next show, the delight in your eyes, the absolute delight that you get time with your son.
Yeah.
And that's because you made a choice.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I really do spending time with them.
It's obvious.
Yeah.
One of your moves is to dismiss and downplay your contributions and all the work you do. But in this moment, it looks like something's happening. It's coming up for you as you take that in, where you've been seen as really good.
I think the first thing is just noting that it's something that's worthwhile. So I don't need to be like, no, I don't know, ashamed of the work that I've been doing because these are the relationships that I want the most. And so why would I be ashamed of the work that I'm doing in those relationships? This is a priority for me. Why would I be embarrassed or downplay the amount of work that I'm doing to try to maintain those relationships when it's something that's that vital and that's that important to me? So I think that's maybe the first thing. And the second is just maybe thinking like, and I downplay it a lot, but I guess I tend to look at the failures more than I look at the successes. And so it just doesn't always seem like I've done a great job. And some of it feels like makeup work for past mistakes, if that makes sense. Like, not that it's retribution or like that I'm feeling like I have to do these things because I have to dig myself out of a hole. But in some ways, it's do the moments where I failed, like, how do they balance out with the things that I've done that have been really good? And I don't think that anybody's really doing a scale like that. But sometimes I probably tend to look at that. And so I may downplay those things simply because it's like, no matter how great I've been doing it, like that, like we didn't talk about the fact that my kid and I had a blowout fight like 2 days before where we were at each other's throats and it did resolve itself. But so I guess sometimes it just looks, I don't want to take all the credit for the good stuff because I know the bad stuff's there too.
Did it just resolve itself, or did you do some active work to repair?
I, I did some active work to repair.
Oh,
Mm.
interesting.
And so there's your move again, right? And I'm wondering, ooh, I wonder if that's how you had to stay in connection.
With my parents.
Yeah, it's just a wondering.
Like I got to do the work, but I have to downplay it, like pretend like I haven't done the work.
Can't take the credit, maybe.
Because we were talking about this, but I'm a second born and my sister is older and she is very good at a lot of things. And I was good at a lot of things too, but I was not necessarily good at the things that my sister was good at. That were the traditional things that you think of when you're thinking about the A student and the accomplished musician and all these other things. I'm a good musician now, but at the time I was not interested in putting the practice in that it took. But she was very interested in doing the things that she needed to do in order to be a good student and be a good musician. And like those things were really highly prized. And so the things that maybe was good at, I don't know that those things were recognized as valuable. And so I think I probably spent a lot of my elementary school, middle school, high school life feeling like the things that I did that were good or the things that I do that are amazing are not actually amazing and not actually good. Or if they are, they're not as good as having a good hard work ethic and getting the grades and putting in the practice. And so I feel like that might be the other side of this, is not recognizing the work that I'm doing because I'm like measuring myself up to this thing that it's just I'm not gonna really be good at ever.
Why did you have to play that role?
I don't know that my parents necessarily went out of their way to give accolades to my sister and not to me, but the rest of the community did. Lots of teachers did. Lots of people in the environment, the ancillary people around our family would. And I don't know that the answer for that was pulling me aside necessarily and saying, hey, your sister's really good at this stuff, but here's areas that you're really good at too. And we notice it and we actually really prize those things. So who cares what those other people say? Who cares if your teacher thinks you should apply yourself more? Like, we know how good you are here and how kind you are and how compassionate you are and how you can make connections with people instantly and how you really care what people think. And you have this great attunement to the emotional state of the world and whatever, right? I didn't know, I like those things didn't necessarily happen. And so if you allow other people just to breathe in accolades for somebody and then there's just there's a void there, then that naturally I just look and say, I feel like I need to be better in that area so I can get that too. Because that's clearly like what the rest of the world is seeing as important and valuable, and kind of like it's a step in a different direction, but it's definitely a part of it. And I think it makes me not realize the work that I was doing and the goodness that I was bringing.
It sounds like it's making you identify that the goodness that you were bringing wasn't valued in your family.
Yeah. It didn't serve it didn't necessarily project as well into the community. Does that make sense?
What's still happening, right? Like you're doing all this work behind the scenes now.
Yeah.
Like you're pursuing dad, and nobody's going to draw attention to, oh, look how Nathan is trying with his dad. But that doesn't mean you're not working hard.
Yeah.
And that nobody noticed. And you're doing a great job. And nobody notices.
All I can see is the fact that we live a couple of miles away and my parents wish that we came over more, right? But that's the thing I can't give them, because we have 4 kids that are all going to different places in different times, and time is the thing I just don't have. And I try to give it when I can, but I just don't always have it. And it's always, well, that's the thing we want right now. And that's tough. Yeah.
So they want more of your presence. They just don't want more of you.
Yeah. As long as I show up the way they want me to.
One of the things I notice,
And bring the kids. Sorry.
One of the things I noticed, Nathan, is, and I don't know, I'm curious what Elle would say. I get a sense that like whoever Nathan's interacting with, like that person becomes like the main character in the story. Nathan's got this ability to actually see people and interact with people and make them feel really important. Anytime Nathan's around, it's like the other people take on this main character role. It's got to feel great. I would imagine your family would want you over like all the time. I don't know.
Maybe that's why they want me over all the
I
time.
want you to come over to my house. You right away even opened up our time together. Dennis, that was really special what you did. And like, you made me feel great.
Yeah.
I have a feeling you're really good at that. I don't know, Al,
that feels true.
It's true.
What's that like to hear when Dennis says?
First, I'm happy to come over anytime, Dennis. And Kristen, same with you. I'd love to visit Ohio and Seattle. I think it feels right. And it's not fake. Like, I genuinely like to encourage people, and I genuinely like to notice the things that people do that are exceptional and tell them about it. Notice people and notice what they're good at and make sure that they know that I notice those things. And it's not self-serving. I'm not trying to like necessarily tell them that so that I'll have some sort of edge. It's just, I feel like people don't get enough of that. And so
maybe because you didn't get enough of that.
Probably because thanks, Kristen. You're right. It's probably about me.
I think it is genuine that you do. That is a gift, right? But that's developed out of the hunger for not having that as you're growing up and knowing how important it is to receive that from someone.
Yeah.
It is genuine.
And that's where we end today. We are so glad you joined us. We want to invite you to get involved in the show. First, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That way, you don't miss out on a future episode. If you're super curious, you can also find us on YouTube. Second, if you'd like to learn more about joining us and sharing your story, send us an email at phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. That's phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This podcast and website represents the opinions of Elizabeth Key, Kristen Boskel-John, and Dennis Roberts, and their guests to the show and website. The content here should not be taken as medical or psychological advice. This content is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a therapist-client relationship. Why do we need growth and change to happen? Well, the experiences our body had during our formative years were stored in an implicit memory. Do you find yourself continuing to say yes and be overcommitted? Do you find yourself immediately saying no and missing out on experiences, relationships, and life-giving things because you're afraid of being uncomfortable?